My name is Audrey Owens. I'm 32 years old. And this is the story of how my own mother erased me from her will, then turned around and demanded I pay her $1,500 a month to keep the lights on. You ever smell something that yanks you backward through time like a ripcord? For me, it's butter on a hot pan. Even now, decades later, it takes me straight back to Sunday mornings. My dad in his old apron, flipping pancakes, whistling Stevie Wonder tunes, cutting little smiley faces into the stacks just for me. I was 6. His sweetest little princess. That's what he used to call me. Then he dropped the spatula. 1 second he was laughing. The next he was clutching his chest, face twisting in pain. The spatula clattered to the floor like it knew something was wrong. I screamed, but everything felt like it moved in slow motion. The neighbors peeked out through their curtains, whispering. The ambulance lights painted our quiet street red and blue. He never came home. My father died of a heart attack that day. Just like that, my world collapsed. My mother, Sarah Owens, back then she was a first-grade teacher, cried at the funeral. But not for long. Within months, she was back at her book club and joining widows' socials at the church. That's where she met Paul. He had silver hair, horn-rimmed glasses, and a softness to him. I never hated him. Honestly, I think I wanted to. But he was always kind. Called me kiddo, asked about school, never overstepped. My mother told me to call him Dad Paul. But I never could. Not really. I was 7 when she sat me down and said she was pregnant. I didn't really understand what that meant until the blue crib showed up. Then came the bottles, the baby wipes, the mountain of Mason-themed everything. That was my half-brother, Mason. My mother's miracle. Her second chance. And from the moment he arrived, I was invisible. Everything was Mason. By the time I was 8, the pancakes were gone. Mornings became cereal alone at the table. My mother didn't see me off to school anymore. Mason had a fever, she'd say, or, he kept me up all night. And I believed her. At least I tried to. I was just a kid trying to believe I hadn't been replaced. But I had. Paul noticed. He wasn't my father, but he noticed. When Mom forgot my birthday, twice, he showed up after work with a cupcake and a quiet apology. He drove me to school, bought me muffins, and clapped when I got my karate yellow belt. He was there when my mom wasn't. And that meant something. Still, Paul was no match for my mother's tunnel vision. When Mason drew crayon all over the hallway wall, she said he was expressing his creativity. When I brought home an art project I was proud of, she told me to focus on math because drawing won't get you anywhere. When I got an A in science, she said, "Good job," and turned to ask Paul if Mason finished his milk. At 10, I'd already learned that effort didn't mean affection. She quit her job, said Mason needed her full-time. I got used to packing my own lunch, brushing my hair into uneven ponytails, and leaving quietly so I wouldn't disrupt the new prince's routine. And through it all I held my tongue. I studied hard trying to impress her. I became self-sufficient, hoping she'd notice. I got straight A's, cleaned the house, helped Paul with chores, all in silence. I swallowed every ounce of resentment and turned it into resolve. If she couldn't see me, I'd make the world see me. Then came the first real fight. I was 13 and Mason, now 5, had spilled soup all over the carpet. Paul asked Mom why Mason wasn't cleaning up his own mess. She exploded. "He's just a kid. He needs protection." Paul argued back. "You're forgetting you have another child." I was in the corner, clutching a textbook, listening to them argue over whether I still mattered. I poured myself into my schoolwork. My dream was to attend Temple University in Philly. I didn't want to run away. I just wanted space to breathe. When I told Mom about my dream, she laughed. "College. You know, we have Mason to think about. Be realistic." But Paul, bless him, pulled out a small savings account he'd been secretly putting aside. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started. He said, "Originally it was for the porch, but I'd rather fix your future than a set of stairs." I still remember the look on my mother's face when she found out. "You're throwing money at an ungrateful girl," she said. But Paul, God love him, stood firm. She grew up in this house without help. I won't let her walk into adulthood alone. I got into Temple at 17. Partial scholarship. The rest from Paul's savings and my part-time jobs. When I left, I didn't say goodbye to Mason. He never looked up from his video game anyway. I didn't cry. Not until I saw Paul wave from the driveway, alone. College was hard. Ramen dinners, double shifts, sharing apartments with strangers, but I was free. And I was finally seen. Professors praised my work. Classmates turned to me for help. I started to believe in myself the way Paul had always believed in me. But back home things were falling apart. Paul called often. He sounded tired. Said Mason never left his room. My mother sold Paul's car to pay off debts. Mason was now smoking in the house, throwing parties, demanding more and more. Paul stayed because he said, "I made a promise to you, Audrey." But then the call came. Paul had collapsed at a worksite. Another heart attack. Just like my father. He didn't make it. And that was the day I lost the only real parent I ever had. The funeral was held on a gray Tuesday that looked like it had borrowed its mood from me. Rain fell steady and quiet as I stood over Paul's casket, trying to keep it together. But inside something broke that day. Not because he was gone, though that pain was sharp and raw, but because of what came after. Because of what my mother turned his death into. She cried, loud and dramatic, her sobs echoing through the church like she was the star of a tragedy. But I knew those tears weren't for love. They were for what she had lost. His paycheck, his stability, the man who had quietly patched up the holes she created. And Mason. He showed up in ripped jeans, an old hoodie, and headphones still hanging around his neck. He didn't speak a word. Just sat at the back of the church scrolling through his phone, smirking like he was bored. No one asked where I had been. No one thanked me for rushing home. And when the service ended, no one hugged me except Paul's sister, Aunt Carol. She whispered in my ear. "He was proud of you, Audrey. Always." That night, I didn't stay at my mother's house. I took the train back to Philadelphia and locked myself inside my tiny apartment. I cried myself to sleep holding Paul's last letter, just a short note he'd written on my graduation day. "You are more than what they chose to see. Never let anyone make you feel invisible again." I taped it to my mirror. 2 years passed. I worked my way up from junior consultant to associate strategist at a mid-tier financial firm. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. I budgeted every cent, skipped luxuries, and focused on building a future I could call my own. Then the call came. It was a Wednesday night. I had just come home from work, ready to try a new pasta recipe. I was stirring the sauce when my phone rang. Mom lit up the screen. I hesitated. I hadn't spoken to her much since Paul's funeral. Not out of anger, just survival. "Audrey," she said, breathless. "I need you to come home. We're struggling." I leaned against the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "What kind of struggle?" "Mason still hasn't found work. The house is falling apart. The bills are. It's just too much." Felt a familiar sting. The guilt she always knew how to summon. "I'll think about it," I replied quietly, then hung up. 3 days passed. Then came the text. Then a video call at 6 a.m. Her face filled the screen, tired, worn, and begging. "Just $1,500 a month. That's all I'm asking. I swear it's only temporary. Just until Mason gets back on his feet." I wanted to scream, "When is that going to happen?" "When he's 40. But instead I said, "Just for now," and set up the transfer. Each month, $1,500 disappeared like magic. Like I had mailed it into a black hole. I skipped dinners with friends, canceled gym memberships, and put my dreams of a condo on pause. Also they could keep the lights on. 2 months later I decided to visit. I brought a basket of groceries, a few gifts, and a sliver of hope that maybe things weren't as bad as I feared. But it wasn't my mother who opened the door. It was a girl, maybe 21, 22, with bright pink hair and nails so long they could scratch glass. She was chewing gum, staring at me like I was the one intruding. "Who are you?" I asked. She blew a bubble. "Kayla. I'm Mason's girlfriend. I live here. You could have hit me with a brick and I wouldn't have blinked harder." "Where's my mother?" I asked, stepping inside. "She's in the kitchen." "Oh, you're Audrey, right? Mason's mom talks about you sometimes." Mason's mom. That phrase snapped something in me. My mother entered, wiping her hands on a towel. Her face lit up when she saw me, but her eyes darted straight to the grocery bag. "What did you bring?" "Groceries. Essentials." "Oh." I set them on the table. Kayla helped herself to the cookies like she owned the place. "You should have gotten the low-sugar kind," she said. "I'm watching my figure." I didn't respond. I just looked around. The house was a wreck. Pizza boxes, soda cans, dirty laundry on the floor. It looked like a frat house, not a family home. Mason never came out. I heard the muffled sounds of gunfire from a video game behind a closed door. At dinner it was just me, Mom, and Kayla. Mason didn't even say hello. Kayla talked non-stop about starting a YouTube channel. Mom nodded along like she was listening to Oprah pitch a business plan. I sat there, silently fuming. When dinner ended, I pulled Mom aside. "Why is she living here? Where is the money going? I've been helping you, not funding Kayla's influencer dreams." Her face turned cold. "Don't be selfish, Audrey. You already have everything. Mason and Kayla need help. All you do is criticize." "I'm not criticizing," I said. "I'm warning you. This won't last forever." "Then don't help," she snapped. "But don't come crying when you have no family left." That night I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. Felt hollow. 2 weeks later, Kayla texted me. "Can you bring those vanilla cookies again? Mason's mom really liked them." Mason's mom. Not my mom. I didn't reply. I didn't cancel the transfer yet. But I started paying attention. I logged into my bank and stared at the line labeled recurring transfer, $1,500. One day I'd have to make a choice between who I was and who they needed me to be. I didn't plan the visit. I didn't even tell anyone I was coming. I just got off work on a Saturday, drove 2 hours in silence, and pulled up to the old house, the one I had helped keep afloat with more than just money. The one that used to have Paul's laughter echoing in the walls and now just stood like a mausoleum full of Mason's broken promises. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside and froze. The sofa Paul used to sit on, his faded blue recliner with a creaky footrest, was gone. Replaced by a slick, black leather sectional set, the kind you'd see on some influencer's Instagram post. There was a curved screen TV mounted on the wall, soundbar and all. I didn't have any of that in my apartment. I couldn't afford it. Mom came out of the kitchen holding a smoothie. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Audrey, you didn't say you were coming." "No," I replied, glancing around. "I didn't." She sipped from her glass. "Well, you could have warned me. The place is a bit messy. How did you get all this?" I asked, gesturing to the furniture. Before she could answer, Kayla came bouncing down the stairs in a too-short nightshirt and designer slippers. Her hair was a mess, but I could still smell the perfume cloud she floated in. "Oh hey," she said, not even pretending to be surprised. "I was gonna text you." She flopped onto the new couch like she'd owned it her whole life. "Mason wants to convert the storage room into a gaming den. Can you help clean it out before you go?" Paul's old storage room. Mason's gaming room, said slowly. He grinned. "Well, yeah. His mom gave him everything, so it's basically his now." His mom. Blinked. "You mean my mom?" Kayla shrugged. "Whatever. She treats me like a daughter anyway." And then she pulled out a folded piece of paper from her hoodie and waved it in front of me like a golden ticket. "Here. I was gonna show Mason's uncle, but you can read it too." Took it. It was a will. A legal, notarized will with my mother's signature and everything. "I, Sarah D. Harper, being of sound mind, hereby leave all my assets, including my home and savings, to my son Mason Harper." There was no mention of my name. Not even a line acknowledging I existed. I looked at my mother. Her eyes were glued to the floor. "Is this real?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You actually left me out of your will." She looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "Audrey, you have your own life. You don't need anything from me." "That's not the point," I said, trembling. "The point is you chose to erase me. After everything I gave. After every dollar I sent. After all those years of being treated like the help while Mason got to play royalty." Her lips tightened. "You always made things difficult. You were too independent. Too cold. Mason, he needed me. I needed you." I exploded. "I needed you the night I had a fever and lay shaking in my bed while you cuddled Mason. I needed you when I was cleaning up his messes, when I got that scholarship, when Paul cheered for me because you couldn't be bothered. You don't understand." "No," I snapped. "You don't understand. You loved him more. Fine. But don't stand here and pretend it was ever fair." Then came the blow that finished me. "I never loved you the way I love Mason," she said flatly. "You didn't need me like he did. You were always strong. Mason needed protection. And love isn't equal, Audrey." I did what I had to do. I stood there stunned. Not angry anymore. Just broken in a way I didn't know I still could be. I dropped the will on the floor and walked out without saying another word. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop screen. The words "recurring transfer, $1,500 per month" glared back at me. Clicked cancel. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt. Felt freedom. The next morning I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, opened my budget spreadsheet and started shifting funds. The money I once labeled as family support was now possibility. A trip to Colorado. Business course. A down payment on a condo. 3 hours later my phone buzzed. It was Mom. "Anna, I think there's a problem with the bank transfer. Can you check it?" I didn't reply. An hour later. "Sweetie, I'm sure it's just a glitch. But I need that money to pay the electric bill." Still nothing. Then the guilt parade rolled in. "If you really stopped the payments, you're being selfish, Audrey. After everything I've sacrificed for you. I didn't raise you to be heartless. You didn't raise me at all, I thought." Paul did. Day 2. Mason texted. "You're ruining everything over a few bucks. Mom's crying nonstop. Hope you're proud of yourself." Day 3. Kayla messaged me on Instagram. "Wow. Can't believe you're this cold. Tommy is literally having a mental breakdown. You're evil." I blocked them all. Mason. Kayla. Every app, every platform. But they didn't stop. Emails poured in. Guilt-tripping, begging, threatening. Photos of overdue bills. A picture of Mason looking depressed in front of his gaming setup. As if his poor mental health was my responsibility. That night, I pulled open a drawer and reread Paul's letter. "Real love doesn't ask you to prove you deserve it." I folded it carefully and placed it under my condo paperwork. Then I changed my email. My phone number. My emergency contact at work. I didn't care who thought I was cruel. Because for the first time in my life, I'd finally chosen myself. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I last heard my mother's voice. 6 months without daily guilt texts. Without photos of unpaid bills. Without pitiful voicemail sobs that morphed into shouting. 6 whole months of breathing air that didn't carry the weight of other people's expectations. At first I checked my email every morning like a reflex. Waiting for another sad plea from Mom, a bitter insult from Mason, or a petty jab from Kayla. But slowly they stopped. Or maybe I just stopped looking. Instead, my mornings became something else entirely. I woke up in my 3rd-floor apartment. Sun pouring through cream-colored curtains. The walls were lined with framed prints of my old art projects. The ones Mom once said were a waste of time. I brewed coffee in a French press. I played jazz in the background. And I smiled. Not wide, not performative. Just a quiet, real kind of smile. The apartment was mine. Paid for with my money. No loans. No co-signers. Just me. And no Harper names on the deed. At work, I had been promoted to team lead. It was the result of a presentation I gave to the board. A strategy pitch that included a story about boundaries and knowing when to say no. I never used names, but everyone in the room felt the message. Afterward, a junior analyst stopped me in the hallway. "Hey, Audrey. That part about reclaiming your life. I needed to hear that. My ex-mother-in-law still thinks I owe her rent for living in her house with my kids." I smiled and nodded. You don't owe anyone what they never gave you. The money that used to vanish into that family black hole every month now sat safely in an investment fund. I even took a real estate class on the weekends. My dream wasn't just a condo anymore. It was freedom with foundation. A life on my terms. And I didn't owe it to anyone but myself. Still, old habits die hard. On some lazy Sunday afternoons, I'd walk by the grocery store near Mom's old neighborhood. I used to dread those trips. Mom grabbing generic brands while scolding me for even glancing at the snack aisle, only to go home and buy Mason a brand new controller. Now I walked in and grabbed the things I wanted. A $12 bottle of wine. Organic strawberries. The expensive French cheese I once stared at longingly. I didn't ask permission. I didn't hear a voice in my head telling me I was selfish. I thought of Paul and I smiled. And then came the moment I didn't expect. I was driving to a friend's birthday dinner, dressed in my favorite navy jumpsuit and heels I couldn't afford back in college. The route took me near the old neighborhood. As I slowed at an intersection, I spotted them. My mother stood outside the convenience store, shoulders slumped, staring at a lottery ticket in her hands like it held all the answers. Her hair was tied back sloppily. Her skin looked pale and tired, like someone who had been living off processed food and anxiety. Next to her was Kayla, chewing gum, laughing, holding a bag of chips. Still dressed like she was starring in a budget reality show. And Mason. He was pacing near the parking lot, yelling into his phone. Same hoodie, same slouch, same look of entitlement like the world owed him something just for existing. I gripped the wheel tighter. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel panic or rage or sorrow. Felt so. Then the light turned green. And I drove left. Away from them, away from the past. Not because I hated them, but because I loved myself more. Later that night, I curled up with a cup of tea by my window, the sound of soft rain tapping on the glass. I opened my journal, something I had restarted recently. At the top of the page I wrote, "I didn't escape them. I outgrew them." I thought about the younger me. The girl who once begged her mother for love, who cleaned up after others, who believed that if she worked hard enough, she'd be seen. And I wanted to reach back in time and tell her, "You're going to be okay. One day you won't just survive. You'll thrive." And none of them will have access to that. The next morning I got an unexpected message request on LinkedIn. "Hi Audrey. This is Aunt Carol. I hope it's okay to reach out. I heard about the will. And everything else. Just wanted you to know I'm proud of you. And you're not alone." Tears slipped down my face. Not because I was sad, but because, for the first time in my adult life, someone in the family saw me. Truly saw me. The message from Aunt Carol stayed with me for days. It wasn't long. Just a few kind words. But it was more than I'd gotten from anyone in my family since Paul died. I wrote back cautiously at first, not sure if she was reaching out of guilt or gossip. But her next message erased the doubt. "I always knew how unfair it was. Your father, your real one, would have never let it happen if he were alive." I blinked at the screen. No one ever talked about my dad anymore. He had become this soft, silent shadow in the background of every memory. But Carol remembered. And she didn't sugarcoat the truth. She called it what it was, wrong. A week later I met her for lunch. We sat at a little cafe in Old City, sipping iced tea under a striped umbrella, and for the first time in years, I felt safe speaking honestly. "I thought maybe I imagined it," I admitted. "That maybe I was just sensitive. That I exaggerated how bad it got." She shook her head slowly. "You didn't imagine anything, Sarah. She changed after your dad died. Hardened. Everything became about her. And when Mason came, she found a reason to rewrite her own motherhood. She couldn't face what she'd done to you, so she erased you instead. Those words hit me like thunder, because they were the truth I never gave myself permission to say out loud. She used to tell the family that you were too serious, Carol continued. That you didn't need her the way Mason did. But we all knew. We saw how you'd sit at the kids' table while she held Mason on her lap like he was made of glass. I looked away, blinking fast. Why didn't anyone say anything? She sighed. Because no one wanted to upset her. Paul was the only one who dared to speak up. And he paid the price for it. Clenched my jaw. I miss him every day. Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Me too. But I think he'd be proud of what you've done. Of the life you've built. That night, I went home and pulled out the envelope I hadn't touched since Paul's funeral. It contained 3 things: a photo of the 3 of us, Paul, me, and a 10-year-old version of myself holding a karate trophy, a birthday card with his handwriting, "Keep kicking, kiddo," and a folded document I had barely glanced at in my grief. It was Paul's will. He had never mentioned it. Never talked about it. But he left it with Aunt Carol to give to me if something happened to him. And when I read it, I stopped breathing for a moment. To Audrey Owens, my stepdaughter, who I consider my true daughter in every way that counts, I leave my entire personal savings account, my pension fund, and the rights to the small rental property on Greenvale Avenue. I stared at the line over and over. I had no idea he owned a rental property. No one did. It wasn't large. Just a duplex he inherited from his brother in Ohio, rented to a retired couple. But it was in my name now. Fully legally. And that changed everything. The next day, I made an appointment with a financial advisor and a real estate lawyer. 2 weeks later, the deed was officially transferred. I filed the necessary documents, set up a trust, and began collecting rent directly. The rental brought in $1,200 a month. Nearly the exact amount I had once sent to my mother. I smiled when I realized that. It was poetic. The money I used to bleed out of guilt was now income built from love. And that's when something shifted in me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. Not long after, I received a notice from the property appraiser's office. The duplex had appreciated significantly in value. The neighborhood was growing. I'd need to decide whether to sell or reinvest. I laughed out loud in my apartment when I read the letter. For once, the universe was putting something in my column. Then the unexpected happened. A family friend, someone who still lived near my mother, sent me a discreet message through Facebook. "Hey Audrey, I thought you should know. Your mom's been talking about taking out a second mortgage on the house. Said she's planning to help Mason start a gaming business. Just thought you might want to know where your past help went." My stomach turned. It wasn't that I was surprised. It was that I was done. They were still living in delusion. Mason was still a man-child, Kayla still the queen of chaos, and my mother still the eternal martyr pretending the world owed her a parade for raising her son. I thought of Paul again. And suddenly I knew what I needed to do. Closure wasn't going to come from another argument. Another confrontation. It wouldn't come from yelling or crying or trying to make her understand. Closure would come from proof. From power. From reclaiming what was mine. So I made a plan. Not to hurt anyone. But to remind them and myself what I had become without them. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back. Not this time, not for what I had in mind. It had been over a year since Paul's funeral. Over 6 months since I'd cancelled the payments. And just a few weeks since I'd officially become the owner of the Greenvale property. That single act, Paul's final gift, had changed my life. But what mattered more than what I gained was what I let go of. Still, there was one thing left to do. The annual community fair was being hosted in my old neighborhood park. The same one I used to sit in as a kid while my mom took Mason for ice cream. I remembered watching them walk away together, him swinging her hand like the golden child, while I sat on a rusted bench wondering what I had done wrong to be invisible. This time I didn't sit. This time I showed up. I wore a fitted white blazer, slacks, and a calm, collected smile. My hair was pinned neatly. My heels clicked confidently on the pavement. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. But I stood out because I didn't look like the girl they remembered. And that was the point. I made small talk with a few old neighbors who looked stunned to see me. "Is that little Audrey Owens?" one of them whispered. "She looks successful." Smiled. "Yes, I am." Then, from across the vendor booths I spotted them. My mother, Hilla, Mason. They were manning a table, selling Mason's custom gaming merch that looked like it had been printed on someone's ancient HP DeskJet. Kayla was scrolling through her phone, bored. Mason was half asleep in a camping chair. And my mother, Isami. Her eyes widened. She stood quickly, tugging on her blouse, forcing a smile. "Audrey," she called like we were long-lost friends. "Audrey, over here." I didn't stop walking. But I didn't run either. I walked straight up to the booth and stood there, letting the silence thicken the air. Mason looked up lazily. Kayla popped her gum. My mother stepped forward. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, voice too sweet to be sincere. "We were actually just talking about taking out another mortgage." I interrupted. Her smile faltered. "Funny," I said, "because I already know." I reached into my bag and pulled out a file. Legal papers. Proof of ownership of Paul's Greenvale property. A recent bank statement. A printout of my consulting firm's quarterly report with my name at the top of the lead strategist roster. Her mouth opened, then closed. "What is this?" she asked. "It's everything I've built since I left this circus," I said evenly. "With zero help from you." "Audrey," she said, her voice slipping into that familiar wounded tone. "That's not fair. You're still holding on to old pain. I raised you." "No," I cut in. "You raised Mason. You tolerated me." Kayla scoffed. "Wow, you're dramatic." I turned to her slowly. "And you're still a squatter in someone else's mess." Her mouth dropped open, but I didn't give her time to speak. "I came here today not to fight. Not to yell. I came to show you what happens when you stop begging to be loved and start choosing yourself." My mother's expression was crumbling now, somewhere between rage and shame. "Mason," I said, turning to him, "the world doesn't owe you a single thing. And neither do I." He blinked, clearly unused to hearing no. Then I looked at my mother again. I used to think cutting ties meant losing everything. Now I know. It meant gaining myself. I turned to walk away. But I paused once more, just before leaving earshot. "Oh, one more thing." I turned around and lifted the final document in my hand, a copy of Paul's will. "I wasn't in your will, Mom. But I was in Paul's. He left everything to me. His savings, his property, his respect." I let that linger. "And that's worth more than any apology you'll never give." And then I walked. I didn't turn around. Not when Kayla cursed under her breath. Not when Mason shouted, "You think you're better than us?" And definitely not when my mother called my name again, voice cracking like something inside her had finally snapped. Because I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a woman with a future, and they were nothing but echoes from a past I no longer lived in. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. There's no applause when you finally sleep through the night without guilt. No fireworks when you look in the mirror and actually like the person staring back. Peace comes quietly, like a gentle tide that doesn't ask permission. It just stays when you stop chasing storms. 2 weeks after the community fair, I moved forward with something I'd been putting off for years. I bought my first home. Not a fancy mansion. Not a status symbol. Just a quiet 2-bedroom cottage tucked between old maples in a neighborhood where people left notes for their mailman, and kids rode bikes without looking over their shoulders. I decorated it with everything I loved. Soft lighting, bold art, a cozy reading nook by the window. I painted the kitchen cabinets a warm shade of green, just because it reminded me of peace. I invited Aunt Carol to see it first. She walked through the front door with a pie in one hand and tears in her eyes. "You made it," she whispered. "Paul would have loved this." Smiled. He's the reason I believed I could. She helped me hang the last picture frame, one of me as a child holding that karate trophy. And beside it, a photo of Paul, grinning in his denim jacket, forever the quiet hero of my story. There were no more texts from my mother. No calls. No surprise appearances. It was as if she finally realized the bank of Audrey Owens had officially shut down, and this time permanently. But that didn't mean I didn't still see the ripple effects. One afternoon, while out grocery shopping, I ran into Mrs. Levington, an old neighbor who used to gossip from her porch like it was her full-time job. She looked me up and down. "I hear your mother's been telling people you abandoned the family," she said, narrowing her eyes. "That she gave you everything and you turned your back." I didn't flinch. I just smiled. Let them believe whatever helps them sleep. I sleep just fine. 'Cause I did. For the first time in decades, I wasn't reacting, I was living. I took a sabbatical from work and traveled. A week in the Colorado mountains. A weekend by the ocean in Maine. A 3-day art retreat in Santa Fe where I painted until my hands were stained in every color I was once told was useless. I started a small blog. Nothing fancy. Just reflections, stories, financial tips for women rebuilding their lives from the ground up. It grew faster than I expected. Strangers began emailing me. Women with similar wounds, thanking me for saying what they never could. One message read, "I canceled the payments. I stopped explaining myself. I chose peace over guilt. Thank you for being brave first." Cried. Not because I was sad, but because I realized my pain had become someone else's map. That was legacy, not bloodlines. Months passed. My name appeared in an industry magazine under a Top 40 Under 40 feature. The article quoted something I said in a leadership panel. Real love never demands your silence in exchange for acceptance. If it does, it's not love. It's control dressed in guilt. I never heard from my mother again after that fair. But sometimes I thought about her, about how she stood surrounded by the very people she chose over me, watching me walk away. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. And I thought about Mason too. How long would he keep expecting someone else to clean up his life? How long before he realized the world didn't bend for him the way our mother did? But those weren't my questions to answer anymore. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't require revenge, just distance. One crisp fall morning, I stood on the porch of my new home, a mug of coffee in hand. The sky was soft and gold, and the wind carried the scent of something warm and familiar. Butter on a hot pan. Paul's pancakes. I closed my eyes and smiled. "I'm okay," I whispered. "I really am." And I meant it, because I didn't just walk away from my past. I walked toward something better. A life that belonged to me. Not bought with guilt. Not built on silence. But earned one bold choice at a time. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is choose yourself, even when it means walking away from the people who taught you how to beg for love. Audrey Owens didn't get revenge. She got something far more valuable. Freedom, clarity, and a future that no one can take from her again. Have you ever had to let go of someone to find yourself again? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge.